VO2 max is measured doing a stress test. Obviously, people have heard of people doing stress tests if it's for the heart, but those usually aren't taken to maximum, obviously, because we're looking at an older individual and we're trying to look at if they have any heart issues, any blockages, and they can measure that with the EKG. So, but in an athlete world, and we want to measure their maximal aerobic capacity, we put them on a treadmill, let's say anywhere from 5 to 8 miles per hour, depending on their fitness level. And we start at 0 grade, and every 2 to 3 minutes, we start increasing the gradient in the treadmill. We can measure their oxygen utilization at these different points, and obviously it starts to go up, but everyone is going to have a plateau.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very, very excited to introduce to you Mark Smith, Ph.D. Dr. Smith obtained a bachelor's degree in PE and sports science and a teaching certificate in PE and mathematics from Loughborough University, England. He completed both his master's degree, exercise and sports science, and his doctorate, physiology at Colorado State University. And here is the real interesting part, the real part that's very close to my heart. He has worked with Dr. Cordain, the founder of the modern paleo diet movement, since 1988. And Dr. Smith is also a leading expert on supra-maximal interval training, which I'm sure we'll get into today. And he has maintained his own health and conditioning practice at the sports club at Mission Hills in CC in Rancho Mirage, California since 2006. The paleo diet is something that is very close to my heart because, as many of you know my backstory, I had massive pain and inflammation, and I was searching for different cures. I was going to doctors. One person said, oh, you have carpal tunnel, you have arthritis, it's a herniated disc that's causing this, all these different diagnoses. And I'm up late at night trying to buy wrist braces and pain relief devices from Amazon. And one day it clicked that inflammation comes from what I put inside my body. And if I change what I put inside my body, and so then I started researching, how do I lower inflammation in the body? And I came across the paleo diet. My inflammation went away. I've been pain-free ever since. I'm feeling better than I ever have. And I've pretty much been on the paleo diet for got to be over 10 years now. So Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Now, my former colleagues, and I actually just went back for a reunion, I'm going to just make sure that we get the pronunciation correct because it's a very strange one when we look at the English language. It's actually pronounced Loughborough.
Loughborough. I knew I said it wrong.
We often, when we would talk to each other, we'd just do L-U-F-B-R-A, Loughborough. But that's crazy that's how it's spelt, but that's how it's pronounced. So, yeah, that was my undergrad and then headed out here. So, but that's great to hear that you've had such success doing the paleo diet. My journey started almost 35 years ago.
Let's hear about your journey. How did you get interested? How did you start working with everyone in the paleo diet movement? Because you started real early.
Yeah, I was essentially Dr. Cordain's first graduate student that had an interest in Paleolithic nutrition, and I was purely I was at Loughborough doing an undergrad and then a postgraduate teaching certificate, and most of the professors had come to the States and done master's degrees, PhDs, et cetera, et cetera. So there were a lot of us who were quite keen to come to the States. And I took a class that was something to the effect of, health-related fitness and the realization most disease comes from lifestyle. And so that if we change our lifestyle, we can change our disease prognosis. I'm like, wow, this is interesting. So that kind of took me on a path and an interest to come to the States to do a master's degree. And it was, just really throwing a dart at the dartboard. It was actually a friend of mine who was another student who went ahead of me and just looked for sunshine or snow. So he looked in Florida, California, and Colorado, and he was already there. I actually had taken a year out and came out to the East Coast in Boston to play rugby. I was a rugby player, and no rugby in Boston during the winter. So I headed out to Breckenridge, where he was basically spending his Christmas break. And while I was there, I got to go to Colorado State, the department chair, and who literally offered me an assistantship on the spot because I actually had a better transcript than my friend and he was doing really well. So that's how it all started. And so I got myself a place, an assistantship and a place on the program for sports science and exercise science. And just by coincidence, Dr. Cordain was given as my advisor. And in that time, he was researching Paleolithic nutrition, but no one really knew it. He was just the mad professor in his office, had a few articles. That was 88. I think his initial research probably started around 86, but he was keeping it very much under wraps, if you like. And then
what kind of use
out.
cases? I'm just curious. What kind of use cases was he researching it for in the beginning? The paleo diet, was there like a specific use case?
Yeah, well, I think for him it was just, he was a lifeguard, fitness buff. His actual main interest at the time was kind of body composition. So he was always just generally interested in health and performance. And I think Boyd Eaton's article in 1985 in the New England Journal of Medicine was a big influence. But I think some other articles and books, he just he'd done vegan, he'd done everything. And then suddenly this was sort of came across his desk. He's like, I'd better start, I want to start researching this. And then, so like I said, he was kind of the mad professor in the office. At that time, it was just a template. And that was like, okay, what did we evolve eating? Well, just think of nature. What can you eat without processing things? Animals, vegetables, fruits, some nuts and seeds, and there you are. That's pretty much it. So in the early days, the research was very much about going, all right, well, is there any research to show that grains are bad for us? So he had a whole, and actually initially it was one filing cabinet drawer with one manila folder on just grains. Dairy was something we wouldn't consume, so there was a folder for dairy. Legumes was something we couldn't consume, so there was a folder on that. And eventually that one manila folder became a whole filing drawer for just grains. And then eventually the whole file cabinet was for just grains. So, and we still have those file cabinets. The CEO of the company that bought the company from Dr. Cordain has all of that in a warehouse. And it's an interesting story to see that evolution. And one of the things that was very empowering to me was Dr. Cordain never made a statement without having a peer-reviewed article where he'd highlighted the information. So everything was peer-reviewed, everything was research-based, and he just kept building this evidence to support the template. And that's really where it all started. So, but just very quickly, because you asked about what sort of conditions, I would say in the early days, we literally were like, well, we've got to kind of examine this because we hadn't really ever told people eat this way. Are there any deficiencies if we do this? So we did dietary analysis of a number of versions of what that template would look like. And aside from seeing deficiencies, we actually saw an improvement in the minerals and vitamins that are most deficient in the Western diet. So we were like, look, there's no downside to doing this, but can we see a benefit? And that benefit was mostly in the early days for autoimmune patients. So that's kind of where we were looking at initially.
Yeah, and I know, so there's actually, I may as well mention it as well, right? For people that have autoimmune, I know several people personally who have done the paleo. So then there's like the autoimmune paleo, which is people who take it one step further. And what's the difference? The autoimmune paleo, I think they take out nuts, right? Nuts and seeds.
So basically, you're talking about anti-nutrients, and we can get into the discussion on that in great detail if we want. But essentially, plants can't run away, right? So their defense mechanism is to create anti-nutrients. Now, they're going to be paleo foods that have anti-nutrients. We'll get into that. But the one, the two food groups, if you like, that don't have anti-nutrients are going to be very, very well. Animals don't have anti-nutrients. Fruits essentially don't have anti-nutrients. Sometimes the seeds in fruits could be problematic for a few people, but usually not. But particularly the plant, the vegetables, essentially, they do have anti-nutrients. They're the ones trying to survive, to grow the fruit, to propagate. That's their way to propagate. So what I've done with people with autoimmune disease is take them to really just animal protein and fruit. And I've seen an incredible success with autoimmune patients or people with gut issues. And I've seen people with, like we talked at the very beginning, Sean Baker, doing a lot of work with the carnivore diets, become very, very popular. We can talk later about the argument of, why not just do that versus what I'm talking about, but not going necessarily having to go into ketogenesis and just do fruit and animal protein. I see clinically that being very, very beneficial. And I think then you're also getting, which we can talk about when we get into our book on longevity, there's a lot of nutrients that you can get from particularly fruit and vegetables, but then there's the anti-nutrient potential negativity that you can't get from animals. And there's a lot of information that we've got in this new book where some of the influence on some of these longevity proteins and vitamins and minerals you can only get from plants. So it's like I get the argument from the carnivore world. You've got all these anti-nutrients. Anti-nutrients are bad. For some people, for many people, they're not going to be problematic in vegetables, but for some it is. So this is where I think diet can become very individualistic, and you've got to kind of do a bit of trial and error. I've never done full carnivore myself or with any of my clients, but I've done this animal protein and just fruit, and I've seen incredible success with that.
Yeah, and that's a little bit more doable for most people as well. I mean, yeah, the carnivore, look, it's like an elimination diet. You're basically eliminating anything that could be toxic to your body. And so, yeah, I mean, it's no wonder why it works so well.
I think it's the first, the argument would be it's the quickest, simplest way to take all potential anti-nutrients out of the diet. But as you say, it's probably a little easier. And I've not had any people not get the same benefits. I've talked to Sean many, many times, and pretty much everything he can see from someone going on a carnivore diet, I've also seen from someone going on an animal protein and fruit. So, I'm not telling people what to do, but these are two options for you if you've got an autoimmune disease, I think, that can clean things up pretty well. But, if we want to start talking about some of the longevity proteins in the body, NFR2, for example, most of the food activation nutrients are coming from vegetables, not from fruit for that particular one. So I think this is where it's got to become a bit of trial and error from an individualistic approach. Yeah. Do you have a problem with the anti-nutrients in these? If you don't, you can reap the benefits of the very positive nutrients in the vegetables. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people listening, if this sounds extreme, you have to understand there's different levels to this, right? It's like most people are, in my opinion, basically poisoning themselves, eating processed bread and sugars and all sorts of stuff, right? And then they're like, oh, why am I in pain? Why am I lethargic? Why do I have inflammation? I made this may be a very controversial statement. I said this kind of to some friends. We were talking about health, and I said, I actually think that the majority of the surgeries in our countries, and I'm not talking about when someone gets in an accident, I'm talking about someone has back pain and then they go get a back surgery. They have knee pain, they go get a knee surgery, shoulder pain, shoulder surgery. And I think, so many of these, if not possibly the majority of these surgeries, in my opinion, could be avoided by just lowering inflammation in the body. Like before you get your surgery, what if you just said, hey, for 2 months, for 60 days, I'm going to eliminate all the processed foods, all the grains, basically follow the paleo diet like I did, and see what happens if I still have pain in my knee or shoulder or whatever.
Listen, it's, I've always tried to say, look, have an open mind. If I didn't have an open mind to physiology, I would have never embraced Dr. Cordain. I wouldn't have given the time of day to listen to him. You're crazy, So I think having an open mind is really important. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, where I'm at Mission Hills Country Club, it's a retirement community. So obviously a lot of people are retired, aging. I've seen many, many people who will have a surgery. Some are very successful, some aren't. So, and usually most of the orthopedic surgeons I know, that they like the idea of going, hey, yeah, give something a try. If we can avoid the surgery and you get success, why not? Right. But then if you can't see success, then maybe that's the last sort of thing to do, and hope that it works. But 100%, the number of times I'm, seeing people reduce inflammation and things get better, it's worth a try. And usually all sorts of other things improve. Their metabolic health improves, their skin improves. So it's like, at least they get the sort of, they had a motivation to try something to avoid a surgery. And sometimes it might work for that particular purpose, but they get all these other health benefits. So at least they go, well, hey, for those that end up still having to do the surgery, they go, but I still want to eat this way because I've got all these other health benefits. And I think, too, is like the number one thing is to take out ultra processed foods, right? Like then you start going, it's this sort of gradient of improving diet. Number one, take out ultra processed foods. So that would include eating some grains and legumes, and they're probably not that bad for most people if we looked at the population as a whole. Is it optimal? I'd say not, but you're going to see tremendous benefits. And I've seen this clinically. I basically always tell people there's on your plate, there's 3 buckets or 3 little bowls. There's your optimal food, which I would argue is Paleolithic food. Then there's non-processed, non-paleo foods, grains, dairy, legumes. And then there's processed foods. And I would say when I do dietary analysis with people and we say, okay, give me what you're eating now, I would say it's probably about, and this is almost a good version, 50% processed foods, 50% non-processed, non-paleo foods, and 50 processed, 25%, and 25%.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, what we're going to try and do here is we're going to try and take 25% of that processed foods and switch it with 25% optimal. So now the 50% optimal or paleo, 25% non-processed, non-paleo foods, and 25% processed foods. And that's fairly easy for people to do. They're not, starving themselves or, taking away things that they enjoy. It's a very easy transition. And the improvements are very significant in those early changes. And then usually people are motivated, their palate starts to change, and they start to just more naturally, easily go, you know what? I don't crave that processed food so much. So then the next thing you find, they start to increase both of the other two categories. And eventually I see many people get to like an 85-15 kind of a approach, which is what we always advocated for in the first place. And they see unbelievable success.
Yeah. I literally have zero desire to eat a processed sugar dessert. We're out at restaurants and everyone's ordering their, dessert. And I literally have zero desire because I literally know if I eat that, first of all, I'm just going to feel like crap after. My palate doesn't need it anymore. Like you said, it kind of changed. To back up real quick for 1 second for maybe the newer listeners or someone who is not super familiar with paleo. On paleo, you can eat beef, chicken, fish, eggs, all the vegetables you want, all the fruits you want, essentially, right? So it's not super limiting, right? Like a keto is much more limiting, carnivore is obviously extremely limiting. It's not, to me, it's not that limiting. I mean, in this day and age where people are so used to the processed packaged foods, maybe it is, but it really is not. I think it's very doable.
It's more than doable. The hurdle for a lot of people is they go from this package, very convenient, to now having to cook for themselves, go back in time a little bit. But if I were to get a good paleo chef, or if you go to the paleodiet.com, we've got the majority of our website is recipes at this point, because that's what people want. They just want help. Science is great, but at the end of the day, people don't care about science if they're getting better. So if we just go follow these recipes, and we've got like free downloads, like 7-day free download, how to go paleo. So we've got, grocery lists. So there's a lot of resources for people that's just free. Download it. It's all yours. Amazing. And what I find then, it's just the organization part. If someone literally had a chef in their house who's like, okay, I'm making you a paleo breakfast, a paleo lunch, a paleo dinner, paleo snacks, they are not going to be, because we've done a lot of things where we're with paleo ingredients to make them, to get some of that psychological craving stuff, the crispy with chips and things like that. You can do that with other foods that are paleo. So, but it takes a bit more time. It's not just opening a bag. But now there's even, one of the things we've done is try to encourage companies, and we endorse them if they're making products that are then very convenient, but are paleo. Hearts of palm as a linguine, that's fantastic, instead of a pasta from a grain. So it's really the hurdle is just getting motivated to put a little bit more time in to prepping your food. But once you start getting the idea of how you do that, you spend Sunday prepping things and getting your fridge organized, the cooking doesn't take so long. If everything's got to be start from fresh, then it can be a bit time consuming when people in their hectic life, want grab and go. So, but you can create your own grab and go. You just have to be a bit more organized.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. So let's talk about the book, Paleo for Life, which I am. I'm Paleo for Life. I started over 10 years ago and I'm now Paleo for Life. Tell us a little bit about the book and some of the concepts in there.
So there are a couple of things. I think first, Dr. Cordain over the years, I missed some things in his first couple of books, and even the Paleo Answer, which was, I felt, his best book up to maybe to date. I don't know, people would have to read the two, but in terms of a lot of the sort of science and the mechanisms behind paleo, the Paleo Answer was excellent. But there was still some things he missed. One of the big ones was fermentation, and some of the products that, for example, one of the things that became very big in his research was looking at menaquinones, vitamin K2, and how potent those were as an antioxidant, and discovering that dark chocolate or the cacao has one of the highest concentrations of menaquinones. And in the animal world, the highest concentration of menaquinones is St. Louis style pork ribs. So rather interesting, right? Something that you might not think is that healthy, but it has this. So then he was starting to look at, okay, we're talking about some really potent antioxidants. And he then looked at the work of Bruce Ames, who did a thing called the triage theory. That was back in like 2006, but talking about, and he really is, he's got a paper, and we can share this with your listeners, in 2018. He talked about the concept of longevity and survival nutrients. So it's very easy to look at the needs for your survival, because if you don't get them, you die or you get disease very quickly. The longevity nutrients, it's much harder to research that, because we're looking, the changes of over such a long period of time. But that's some of the things he identified is, and there is obviously research on this, particularly when you start to look at mechanisms. I just mentioned NFR2, sirtuins is another one. Some of these proteins that are highly involved in the aging process, and then looking at research where these proteins are increased from nutrients in the foods that we eat. So that became an overall idea for the book, if you like. Like, okay, this is another way of looking at how we eat. And his argument was, in the triage theory, the body is going to preferentially use the because some nutrients are going to be both survival and longevity. And when that's the case, it's going to prioritize survival, right? Makes sense. And so if you're not eating enough of them, you're surviving, but you're not contributing towards your longevity. Then there are nutrients that are only longevity nutrients. They're not even involved in survival. They're just for longevity. So we really took a deep dive into that. And what was interesting is again, it turned out most of the foods were paleo foods, and those that weren't, that might have had some of the nutrients that were beneficial for longevity or even survival, it's got that anti-nutrient component in there. So it's like, you're always kind of go, what's the best food for me here? Well, we want to keep the anti-nutrients low, and then we want to have foods that have, good amounts of nutrients for survival, and then good amount of nutrients for longevity. So I think that's probably the essence of the framework of the book. And we've literally kind of gone, it's like introduction to paleo, introduction to longevity, cellular senescence. We don't get too complicated in that sense, because I think this wants to be more of a practical book for people. And then we just kind of go through the foods, and we talk about the foods and how they then benefit longevity, and what's in those foods that give it, separating the chapters into chocolate, separating it into, onion, garlic, and then vegetables. That's kind of a subchapter. Fruits on its own, animal protein on its own. Olive oil's got its own chapter. So it's very much sort of segmented then as to foods that provide these longevity vitamins.
Yeah, that's great. And for people listening, everyone listening is always thinking, what's in it for me, right? Whether they're conscious or subconsciously thinking that. So what's in it for them? Why someone listening now who's, been on their regular standard kind of diet, maybe they're trying to eat healthy, they're taking some supplements, why should they consider the paleo diet? What do you think are some of the biggest benefits an average person would see? They're 20, 30 pounds overweight, just kind of the average person.
Yeah, I think the first thing, certainly clinically, from because the book as well, I think we've perhaps addressed some things that you can do better than in the earlier days. Like, one of the things is herbs and spices. Basically, the argument is like there's some tremendous longevity and survival nutrients in them, but we don't consume enough of them. We just sparingly sort of splatter our food, when kind of the message from the research we've done is like, no, you can use these a lot more prevalently and use more of them. So that would be something that would be a little bit different. But in terms of what can you expect to see, I think that would be just my overall experience historically with the paleo diet. Anything from, we just talked about some, autoimmune issues can clean up. But I would say for the most people, the first thing they're going to start to see is improved energy, right? Because we're going to start taking control of their metabolic health. So people with, metabolic syndrome is literally an epidemic, obviously, in the Western world, which obviously would include losing some weight, improving the blood sugar levels. And that's going to just overall improve how their energy feels. I see so many people talk about improved sleep, improved skin, just an overall general improvement in health. Then in terms of, the new book talking about longevity, we're not trying to get people to live, a stupid length of time if you're not enjoying your current life, right? So
That's
it's
right.
really first and foremost, quality of life goes up. And then if that can then keep going and you've got good quality of life for longer, great. And I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. We know that, my clinical experience, I know that people have done very, very well from a health perspective and improvement and disease prevention. Longevity, maybe you could argue people haven't been doing the modern paleo diet for long enough to know if we are going to increase longevity. I certainly feel, it's been my template since I met Dr. Cordain 35 years ago. I'm now 61. I don't feel too different to when I was in my sort of late 20s to 30s. A few things have changed. I need reading glasses and, there's definitely some aging things there. But, my overall health, rarely ever get any kind of sickness. I just go about my life and eat well. It's pretty uncomplicated, So yeah. I think, and I'm N of one, but I've been doing this long enough now to know so many people that are this way. And I would say people that are following this kind of, whatever ancestral diet, whether it's paleo or the sapien diet or the carnivore diet, any kind of version of a non-processed, more natural diet, they tend to look healthier and much younger for their age.
Yeah. I think it's a total no-brainer that it's going to increase longevity. I mean, one of the things I've said many times on this podcast is if I had to really kind of break down, okay, health, I would say health is about lowering inflammation in the body more than anything else, in my personal opinion. And so the best way to lower inflammation is by removing all these processed foods, basically following a paleo diet. If you want to go even further, you might want to look at what anti-nutrients, right? Are there tomatoes that affect certain people, or different nightshades, or different things that you may want to, if you want to really dive deep, if you're still having issues. But I think for most people, just a regular paleo would be such an enormous change. I mean, I think the diabetes would be less. I think heart problems. I just think there's it's kind of so obvious when you follow. I look at paleo as a kind of a low inflammatory diet.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I was actually in my notes here. One of the things when I first started, and I'm trying to get people to eat this way, where's the research? And the research in the early days, as I mentioned, it was more to, no one really, given people the paleo diet and followed how they did. So it was more about, look, the research on consuming grains shows that it's not that good for you. Legumes, dairy, processed foods, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a sort of a jigsaw puzzle that we were trying to argue the case for eating this way. And then obviously, anecdotally, we saw what it was doing on case study issues. But over time now, there's more and more research, and people still sometimes go, oh, there's not much research. There's a ton of research. And talking about inflammation, actually in 22, it was published in Nutrients. The author was Liang. And it literally was a meta-analysis. So for those that don't, meta-analysis, that's taking all the studies together and doing statistical analysis. So it's the most powerful way to look at research. And it was the biggest meta-analysis ever done on diets. And it was comparing pretty much all of the diets out there. American Heart Association, the Western diet, the plant-based diet, paleo, DASH diet, Mediterranean diet, et cetera, et cetera. Guess what? Paleo came out number one on decreasing inflammation, improving lipid panels, and lowering blood sugar.
Wow.
So came out number one. So that was great for us to sort of finally go, look, this is a meta-analysis, and it's really supporting that. And it just validates what we've seen clinically, in my case, for the last 35 years.
Yep. This is great stuff. And again, for people listening, it's not like a super restrictive diet. You still eat the chicken, the beef, the eggs, the fish, the seafood, vegetables, fruits, all the stuff that you're meant to eat. And you're eliminating the bread, the pasta, the sugar, sugars and processed sugars and all that other stuff. Right.
And it takes a little bit of, experience and knowledge. But for last night, so dinner last night, who doesn't love a wrap? But, how do you get the wrap? But now, there's a Julian Bakery. People may have heard of that. You go online, go on Amazon and look for coconut wraps. There's one from Julian Bakery. It's fantastic. It's 100% coconut meat, and they're really good quality. They're not breaking up in your hand. And so, last night was some sauteed chicken with herbs and spices, some peppers and some onion, put in the wrap, a little bit of mustard. Oh, delicious, right? Yeah. So I would defy anyone to have one of these and not think it's better than a grain typical wrap, right?
Right.
So it's just a matter of getting some experience of what's available out there. And there is absolutely an increase in foods like that, that will give you an option as opposed to, so that it can stay paleo. And it's just as convenient, just as quick. Like I mentioned, the hearts of palm linguine that we do, just you cut open the packet, rinse it out, put it in hot water for 5 minutes, and I defy anyone to not. In fact, once you've started to go paleo and your palate changes, I would say you would actually enjoy that more than if you had some real pasta made from grain or wheat. Because as you had said, you feel that sort of sugar kick, which your body doesn't want. And you can almost taste the sort of more natural ingredients in the hearts of palm. So, yeah, it's not difficult to do once you commit to it and make that initial change. I think that's take the step. Once you start doing it, it becomes easier.
Yeah, yeah. Your body literally starts craving health. You just because you say, "Hey, that makes me feel good. That doesn't make me feel good," right? And I think it's honestly, it feels like into more intuitive eating, but it feels like you can't really get to intuitive eating, which is like, this is going to feel good for me. This is not going to feel good to me. If you're just flooding your body every day with the processed foods and the sugars, right?
It feeds the craving, right?
Yeah.
The bad food feeds the craving. So
Yeah.
you've got to flip that. An interesting thing, almost a little off topic, this didn't come necessarily from the paleo world, but more from a sort of psychology of changing your diet. I thought this was rather interesting. It might be useful for people that struggle to change. So let's say, for example, you love potato chips, not a paleo food, but we're okay with you having carrot chips. And people are like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way a carrot chip tastes as good as a potato chip. And where they are right now, I understand that is no question that their body goes, this tastes way better than the carrot chip. So there was a protocol that involved starting to mix those two together. So you'd have the potato chips and the carrot chips. And the brain was still getting the satisfaction from the potato chips, but now it was starting to eat some of the carrot chips. But they were now starting to merge together of the satiation and the craving. And eventually you gradually start taking out the potato chips to eventually only leave the carrot chips. And they would still have that brain feeding of like, this is great. So
right.
just that was off the cuff. It just came to my head for some reason.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that. I thought that's a really clever idea.
Yeah, yeah, you're getting that crispies, you're getting the texture. I agree too. I've used coconut wraps as well. But let me ask you real quick: potatoes are paleo, right?
No,
they're not. Okay.
Sweet potatoes are.
Sweet potato. No wonder. Okay, I always eat sweet potatoes, and I've heard over the years sweet potatoes are way better. But I actually didn't know. I thought paleo, because it is from the earth, that it would be paleo, a potato.
So sweet potatoes and potatoes are not. They're different. The different tubers, all right? So the reason that the anti-nutrients in potatoes are far more prevalent and detrimental to health than those in sweet potatoes, and they're quite minimal in sweet potatoes. And then the other aspect of it is the cassava is very high glycemic. Sorry, cassava is the other one. There's the two tubers, and then potatoes. So potatoes and cassava, we say no to the potato because you've got a much better option with some of the other turnips and carrots and sweet potatoes. So they're a different plant than potatoes and cassava, and it's really the glycemic index or glycemic load aspect of it, and the anti-nutrient content is far higher. So there's definitely a lot of people that in the paleo movement, it became so popular and big, everyone became a paleo expert, and there are plenty of those experts telling you that potatoes are fine. Dr. Cordain and the paleodiet.com, we've never said that. We've always said there's a better option using, if you want to get those starchier carbohydrates, you can get them from sweet potatoes or other plant foods, other underground tubers.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Roots, essentially,
And what about, the main problem with, so what about a sweet potato chip that was made with avocado oil and not a seed oil? Would that be a paleo technically or no?
Yeah. So the oils that you'll see some people criticizing even cooking with olive oil. We say that's fine. Some people.
I think that was debunked recently. I think that was debunked like a year or two ago, right? That obviously, if it's super high heat, you don't want to. Off topic again. You don't want to burn your meat by cooking it on the super high heat. But in general,
listen. Anytime if I leave the stove on too long and I see my olive oil smoking, I chuck it out. Right. So but we basically go. I don't think there's sufficient evidence to knock out. Now, what we will say. So there's 6 oils basically that we're okay with. So, I mean, and obviously beef tallow might argue that's number one, right? But that's not an oil. So coconut oil, great. Walnut oil, great. So I don't forget these. I know sometimes I'll
got to be olive oil, avocado oil.
Yeah. So you've got flaxseed and walnut. They're good, but not for cooking because they're so high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, they will break down and degrade very, very quickly. So then the others then are basically going to be avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil, and macadamia nut oil.
Nice.
So those are the ones that we do allow for cooking. But yeah, if someone's saying, well, I think we should be cooking with beef tallow, I'm like, what, if that's easy and convenient for you, I'm not saying that any of the oils we're saying is better than beef tallow. I'm just going, any of these are options for us. So that would be the avocado oil in that example with sweet potato chips. Fabulous. Now, we also have to be careful. When we certify foods, we've got 2 categories. We've got true paleo and paleo flex. So what we sometimes say is, even though all of the foods in there are paleo, if it's a concoction that's trying to replace something, we don't want to make it a true paleo because you could probably overeat it and unnaturally get more of something that you would get in nature. So a sweet potato cooked in avocado oil, we would probably put in the paleo flex category just so people don't go, oh, I can live on these sweet potato cooked in avocado oil. So we don't want that. We want you eating good natural foods most of the time. But as a replacement, so what we almost did with our paleo flex category, those are your replacement foods, Although the coconut wrap is coconut meat. So, I mean, I can't argue that can't be true paleo. So that would be a true paleo food for me. Yeah,
this is great. Tons of benefits. I can personally attest to it. Let's talk a little bit about now. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit. Talk about some of the stuff you've been doing with athletes. So I know you talk about. Explain to people people have maybe heard of high intensity interval training. You're talking about supra-maximal interval training. What does that mean?
Right. So if most people that have done an exercise physiology degree will know this, but a lot of people that get in, just trainers and conditioning coaches may have just done some certifications. I'm not saying they're not super experienced, but they might not have an understanding of the VO2 max measurement and how that pertains to someone training. So VO2 max is measured doing a stress test. Obviously, people have heard of people doing stress tests if it's for the heart, but those usually aren't taken to maximum, obviously, because we're looking at an older individual and we're trying to look at if they have any heart issues, any blockages, and they can measure that with the EKG. So, but in an athlete world, and we want to measure their maximal aerobic capacity, we put them on a treadmill, let's say anywhere from 5 to 8 miles per hour, depending on their fitness level. And we start at 0 grade, and every 2 to 3 minutes, we start increasing the gradient in the treadmill. We can measure their oxygen utilization at these different points, and obviously it starts to go up, but everyone is going to have a plateau. So when you plateau and you come across to the y-axis, which is the VO2, whatever that VO2 is going to be their maximum utilization of oxygen, so the VO2 max. So
and for people listening, VO2 max is one of the most highest correlation with living a longer, healthier life, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's not important, but we'll talk about there are different ways of improving it, okay, and getting other benefits. But that VO2 max, people, because of the term VO2 max, it sounds like a maximal effort, but it's not. Right. That graded exercise test might take 10, 15 minutes, all right? So jumping on the treadmill, so let's say someone maxed out, when you're in an undergrad exercise physiology degree, you do many of these for your friends because they need subjects, and so I've done plenty of these. It's been a while since I've done them, but it's a little uncomfortable. I mean, you're having to go to absolute max. You're trying to stay on there as long as you can. So you've got this VO2 max. If I took the workload, so we said about someone doing, I said 5 to 8. Let's say someone was at 6 miles per hour and the gradient got to 10%. All right, and that's where they maxed out at. Too many people in their head think that's a maximal effort. No, it's the VO2 max. It's the maximum someone can go on a graded exercise test. If I put someone fresh at 6 miles per hour at 10% grade, they're going to go, this isn't that hard. They could probably run for a couple of minutes at that. So it's not their maximum. It's the maximum when we're trying to obtain VO2 max. So very different. So when we then look at different intensities in training, we can talk about, sub-maximal training. So that's got different levels itself. People might have heard zone 2 training recently became quite popular, but we're less than that VO2 max. Then we've got supra-maximal, which is above VO2 max, which could be anywhere from 100% to 250%. Humans have the capability of going relative to that about 250%. All right. So high intensity interval training is above VO2 max, but not necessarily all out. So when I research this topic, I'm always looking, it's usually in the literature, we'll call supermaximal, that can be both all out or just above VO2 max, but sprint interval training is very specific to an all out effort. And so then we're talking whatever someone can give me all out up to 60 seconds, because there's not a human on the planet. Once you've hit 60 seconds, that's where your power output will precipitously drop off. Okay. And the reason for that is what? Lactic acid. Lactic acid starts to reach its peak at about 60 seconds. So that lactic acid inhibits muscular contraction. Power output goes down. And because power output goes down and muscular contractions are now less lactic acid is produced, which is kind of a good mechanism. Otherwise, you die of acidosis. So basically, humans have about 60 seconds. When I look at how this also pertains to Paleolithic nutrition, Paleolithic exercise, humans probably, they see a lion or they see a predator, they've got about 60 seconds to get to a tree and get up it out of danger, or they're out of the gene pool, right? So we evolve far more as sprinters than endurance athletes, I would argue. We've got the capability to train for it. But I would argue the first thing people need to do more than anything is add some sprint interval training into it. And you need so little to see the success. So I could talk about this for a week. So
does it have to be an actual, some people might say, I haven't sprinted in 30 years. It's going to be dangerous. What if I fall down? I mean, me personally too, over the summer, I was doing some sprints on the beach and I face planted a couple of times, trying to go full max. Can you use like the assault bike at the gym where it's 100%. Safe?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
good.
When I use the term, so when I do my lecturing for the Tyler's Performance Suite and we talk about this, it's a great question. I'm like, now sprint means all out. The modality could be a number of different things. So I've got an example, and wish I could sort of show you the video and everything, but I could share some of this information if people are interested. But a gentleman came to me at about, I think it was the early 80s when he came to me. And I would often use a treadmill for doing this, but there's a balance component to it. And I usually don't want people holding on because then there's too much in the arms. So for him, that prevented him from really giving me a good effort. The modality that he enjoyed and he felt very safe was an upright stationary bike, because he's got his hands on the bar. There's no issue with balance and he could just power it as hard as he could. Rowing machine could be fantastic. All right. So you could be, that I use a gradient when I do my sprints on a treadmill, just because then I don't have to go as fast because I'm on a gradient. But someone could use a staircase and they've, got, a rail next to them if they need that. Right. So there's a practical application of this that I've been doing since 1995, and it's pretty common sense, but use your common sense and you'll find that this can be done in many different ways. But as an example, going back to my gentleman that was 83, about 3 years later, so his first attempt at doing this, when we measured him, most bikes usually have a resistance level of about 1 to 25. He was able to move the pedals pretty quickly on about a level 10 or 12. But his peak power output, so it's kind of the Wingate anaerobic test. I would do it slightly differently, but I'd set the resistance, count him down, and then for 30 seconds, go. Most humans will hit their peak power between probably 4 and 7 seconds, in that early, certainly in the first 10 seconds, and then it starts to drop off quite quickly. In his particular case, his peak power output when he first started training with me was 147 watts. What do you think it is 3 years later at 86? and go stupid, because when I do this, no one ever gets it.
Let's say double. So 300.
Still nowhere near.
Wow. 600.
More.
900.
Close.
Wow.
881 watts.
Wow.
On level 25. So he went from a level 12 up to... So basically what happens is, and this is an interesting one for me, and I've seen this so much where I work, because there's a tendency as we age, we think we've got to wrap ourselves in cotton wool. It's the worst thing you can do, because as we age, the atrophy that we see in people as they age, it's due to the preferential atrophy of fast twitch fibers, the type 2 fibers. Why? Because they're not doing anything vigorous. That's what you use your fast twitch fibers for, right? So I actually see the greatest improvements in the elderly. So, and the number one predictor of independent living is power, not just strength, but power. We've got to try to get, with a safe modality, as you quite rightly pointed out, something they're comfortable with, where they are going all out and getting that neuromuscular boom. So, you know, his wife said that he had I think it was a 6-fold increase in his power output. Think that's going to make a difference in his living? I mean, unbelievable, right? So, and that's just one element. You know, the cardiovascular aspect is there too. It's been multiple studies showing that sprint interval training can improve VO2 max. So, you know, so people listening now, we got a bunch of people in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. What's a safe or what's a good way to get started with this? How many times a week? You know, how many minutes or kind of like, what do the intervals look like when I want to do supra-max? Great question. So it's actually, I pulled out some of the newer studies, and a lot of the stuff we were doing has now been validated in the research. And one of the things we used to say was, one of the first studies to ever kind of trying to look at interval training versus this long continuous stuff that the 70s and 80s became such a sort of prevalent in the literature. It was a study back in 85 by Chikisik, and he split 30 minutes into 3 lots of 10. And we were like, the problem with that is if you're not in a 10-minute exercise, if you're not starting to perspire, it's probably not intense enough to have much of a training effect. So we were like, what are you going to have to change and shower 3 times? 3 lots of 10? That's not going to be very practical. So we had moved it down to this up to 60 seconds or mini intervals accumulating 60 seconds. And now there's a lot of research looking at the benefits of 10 to 20 seconds, what's called reduced exertion, high intensity interval training.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I do the assault bike at 25 seconds, I feel toast.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. If you are dictating the pace, so like a bike, I rarely go above 30 seconds on an upright stationary bike, because there's almost no point. The fatigue curve is so great when you are dictating the pace going all out, you can't. In other words, your 400-meter athletes, we just saw the games in Tokyo, they have to pace themselves for 400 meters, right? They can't sprint the whole way. They're not doing that 100-meter pace. So, you know, you can absolutely do this in 20 to 30 second sort of intervals. But so going... Where were we going?
Or like how many times a week should we be doing that? And how many sets of 20 to 30 seconds?
I'll start with some of the research, and then I'll tell you some anecdotal stuff that's kind of interesting. Research will show you. So there was a study, Marty Jabala up in Canada, his group back in, I forget the date now. It's been a while, probably doesn't matter. Burgermaster was the lead author. Marty Jabala was the last one. And they did a protocol that has then been used by many other research to look at other parameters of what the benefits are in terms of insulin sensitivity, cognitive improvement, all sorts of stuff. So the protocol was on an upright stationary bike, 30 seconds all out, 4-minute recovery, 30 seconds all out, 4 minutes recovery, do it again, 4 minutes recovery, do it again. So 30 seconds with 4 minutes between. That's 2 minutes, done. Now, they were doing research where they were doing this protocol every day, and it actually showed more benefit if they gave them a day's rest.
So I would feel that. I feel that.
Yeah, they had similar improvements in their cardiovascular conditioning, but the power output improved when they were having the rest. So what a great concept. Less is more, right? So that protocol was then used a lot. So that's literally, so that study, just to put it in perspective, what was great about it is they showed that interval training not only improved their power output, but improved their cardiovascular conditioning. So what they did was they took college-age males and they did a VO2 max with them. They established their VO2 max, and then they said, okay, how long can you go at 80% of your VO2 max. So they literally set the power output to whatever corresponded to their test and said, go at 80%. They did that training protocol for 2 weeks. That's it. It was 8 minutes, all right, every other day for 2 weeks. It was 16 minutes over 2 weeks or 8 minutes per week. That's how little they did. They put them back on the bike. I'm going to ask you, Talo, again, you got to guess now. How long did they last? You can go with your first one that you did. Double. Yeah. So they went from 25 minutes to 50 minutes by just 8 minutes per week in 2 weeks of this all-out effort of training. All right, huge. All right. So that research protocol has been used a lot. It's been shown to improve insulin sensitivity. It's been shown to improve cognitive issues. It's been improved now to show epidermal growth factor, bringing it back down to younger athletes, old men, bringing it back down to younger. Like, what was the age difference on that? It was incredible. 68-year-olds brought their levels back to 28-year-old levels of EGF. Amazing, right? So there's lots of other research now getting into some of the other benefits of this approach and the overall all aspects of it. What I wanted to share then is some protocols I've done before that study even came out. We were kind of going, all right, we were trying to do this in the workplace where someone's not having a change in shower. And we actually worked with a product that was just very small, was able to go into the workplace and someone could do it. But this same protocol, I was doing a lecture for the Titleist Performance Institute. Someone brought me in. There's this big argument, a lot of healthcare professionals, and we're talking about the cardiovascular conditioning. Gave my elevator speech, and I said, so here's for a lot of you. You'll be at work. You've probably got a hospitals, whatever, office block. You got a staircase. You hear about taking the stairs, not the elevator. I'm going to tell you to sprint the stairs or go as hard as you comfortably can. And you could do 160 seconds all out. You can split it up into 320s, 415s, 230s. I don't care how you do that 60 seconds, but, not long rests in between, just, no more than 1-to-1 ratio. So you accumulate that 60 seconds and then you're done. Go to your desk, work your morning. Before lunch, do it again. Mm-hmm. This is on Monday. Mm-hmm. After your lunch, let your food go down, do it again. And then before you go home, do it again. So you will have done four minutes. Tuesday, do nothing. Wednesday, do it again. Thursday, do nothing. Friday, do it again. That's all right. Great. So that's 12 minutes per week. That's 4 more minutes than the Burgermaster study. And we saw unbelievable benefits from that. Anyway, I was doing this lecture and there was a physical therapist working in a hospital. And a year later, I was at another lecture where he was attending. He ran over to me and he was just like, look at me. And I'm like, I don't even know who you are. But he had been in that room where I suggested to do this. And he said, I started doing it. He goes, I didn't even change my diet, but I eventually started to see so many health benefits that I naturally started to want to eat better food, and it changed. And he ended up getting his whole department doing this, and he lost 50 pounds, probably eventually in a combination of the exercise and the diet. But so that's kind of an easy sort of protocol. So if you have a way of doing it where you've got access to a staircase, that just becomes very convenient. You don't have to necessarily go to the gym and do this, but you could go to the gym, use a treadmill, use an upright stationary bike, and just do that similar protocol. 60 seconds, 4 minutes recovery. You want at least 4 minutes recovery. You don't even want to go where your heart rate is at. Metabolically, you need a minimum of 4 minutes. Take more if you feel you need it. All right. And do that 3 times per week. So that's 4 minutes, 3 times per week. That's a great protocol. Or just the one that we talked about with Burgermaster, the 30 seconds on the bike 4 times and doing that, every other day for, 3-4 days type stuff. So it doesn't need a lot. It doesn't need a lot.
I absolutely love this. Dr. Smith, we could go on for hours. I want to be respectful of your time. This has been an absolute pleasure.
I've got one more.
Yeah, go for it.
One more very quickly.
Let's do it.
I would do this elevator speech when I tell people, I was like, okay, we're going to the stadium stairs. I take a huge group of people, all sorts of fitness levels, and I'm going to prove to you how little you need of this. I said, okay, so we're going to blow a whistle and you're all going to do as many steps on this stadium staircase. And I've got an Olympic athlete. They can't even get to the top. So no one's going to run out of steps. I blow the whistle and I ask them to imagine them doing this. And I kind of talk about, the first 20 seconds, people are starting to feel they're breathing hard. And then, 40 seconds, the lactic acid's burning. Their legs are starting to also not contract properly. They're like, holy shit, I can't wait for him to blow that whistle. And I blow the whistle and I impersonate how everyone would be. And I don't care how many steps you've done. If you've all been giving me all you have, everyone is bent over, just heaving, trying to catch their breath. I said, guess what? We're done. We're done for the day. Go home, and I don't want you to come back tomorrow, because a lot of you are going to feel this tonight. You're going to have used your muscles in a way that you've not done it, but you're going to come back the day after. So you're going to come back every other day, and we're going to do this basically for a couple of months. We're going to do 30 of these, and it's going to take us 2 months because you're coming every other day. And I simply look at them and go, on the 30th attempt, do any of you doubt that you could do more steps on day the 30th interval versus the first interval? And everyone has always got, well, of course. Wait a minute. You've just basically gone, it's like the late night infomercial, that 3.5 minutes per week is enough to cause physiological change for you to get fitter. Yeah. And they go, oh, never thought of it like that. But then I'm like, I've been saying this. I should probably prove this to myself. So I detrained myself. So I was able, the best I've ever done in recent years was 9 miles per hour at 15% on a treadmill for 60 seconds. I detrained myself to where 7 miles per hour was max. So all I had. If I didn't grab hold and straddle the treadmill, I was off the back. And basically I did that. I did it every other day. But obviously I built in an improvement by forcing myself to go a little bit quicker. But it wasn't, that's not a false. It's just, I could only do that and succeed if I was physiologically improving. So basically I started at 7, day off the next day. And this is all I was doing. Then 7.1, day off, 7.2, et cetera, et cetera. And if I didn't finish the 60 seconds, I would repeat the same speed. So I would only increase it if I improved. So after 3.5 weeks, it was like 18 of these. I think I've got it right here. Was it 18? Yeah, 18 sprints. That took 3.5 weeks. I improved up to 8.2 miles per hour, which is at 15% an additional 32 meters.
Wow.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And that's 3.5 minutes per week. That's how little you need of this if you force yourself to really go hard. And the take home from this is intensity, not duration, is the biggest stressor for causing physiological change.
Yep. And I think, by the way, what we spoke about today with the paleo diet, they work hand in hand, because you have the paleo diet, you have more energy, you don't have as much inflammation, right? I think that's why paleo got so popular in the CrossFit community, because these guys are just beating themselves up real bad, that if they go out and eat some inflammatory foods after, they're going to feel it in their knee or shoulder or back or somewhere else. So they just figured out, like, hey, we need to be paleo if we want to be able to continue to train this hard consistently. Although what you're saying is not really training that hard. It's a very minimal.
Yeah, listen, I'm in awe of what the CrossFit community did and how their performance, some of the stuff, I couldn't go and compete with what I'm telling you, but I don't think you need that for health. Correct. And longevity and et cetera, et cetera. And my goal is always to be able to sprint out of trouble, right? So I don't need to be reproducing that necessarily. So fantastic what they did. And yes, as athletes, phenomenal, but they're not going to win the 100 meters, right? So I would encourage people to train more like a 100-meter runner. And interestingly, they're kind of probably the healthier athletes is what we've looked at in the communities that we've researched. So.
Agreed. Well, Dr. Smith, where can people follow you, find you, shout out the website, and where can people buy the book?
So the first website would be thepaleodiet.com. So that's everything nutrition. And a lot of my articles are on there, and all of the recipes and the team from the Paleo Diet can be found there. I also have my own sort of clinical practice. I actually got a new site coming out very soon, but that's docsmith.org. And so on the interval training, I think we've got one of the articles about that interval training on the Paleo Diet website, but a little bit more there on application. And I'm going to be working on that website moving forward a little bit more. So there hopefully be some tools on what we've spoken about today for that too. But so the paleodiet.com and docsmith.org.
And Paleo for Life, the book can be bought anywhere books are sold, right?
Yep, right here. Paleo for Life. If you go on and just Google that, it'll come up, and you can pre-order it right now. It comes out, so I think October, sort of mid to 21st, I think, if I remember correctly.
Perfect.
And you can pre-order it, and it's got some excerpts there that you can take a look at. But yeah, we're proud of the work in there, and it was an honor to be a co-author with Dr. Cordain. So for Trevor and myself to be co-authors with him, it was pretty special. And it all stemmed from a period of almost a week where I went to visit with him in the summer of 22, and he had really was starting to walk the talk and had really turned his health around. He was doing incredibly well, and it was a wonderful time for me to sort of learn from one of the giants in nutritional research.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. Well, congratulations. Thank you for everything you're doing and spreading the word, and all the people you've helped through spreading this wisdom, the paleo wisdom, and everything else, your training as well. So thank you so much. And yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime.
I'd love to. Yeah, anytime, give me a call, and we can expand on what we've talked about today. So it's been a real pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, it would really mean a lot to me if you would forward this episode along to any friends, family members, anyone that you think that would get value out of it and learn something important. The mission at Peak Performance is to help people prioritize and transform their health. And so if you think someone will get value, please, please, please do forward this episode along to them. Also, if you could please rate and review and subscribe on whatever podcast player you are listening to this on, we would greatly appreciate that as well. It means a lot. And I want to tell you about a couple of new products that we just released. You can get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com. That's BUY peakperformance.com. We just released a brand new grass-fed beef protein isolate. This is my favorite new protein powder because it's great for muscle building and recovering and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't give the stomach discomfort and gas that a lot of people get from different types of proteins like whey protein. Some types of plant proteins can do the same as well. It seems to be really, really easy on the stomach while still giving all the great benefits of muscle building and everything else that you want from taking in adequate protein. So check out our new beef protein isolate. We have it in unflavored, which I actually mix and blend with my morning coffee every morning. We have a vanilla and we have a chocolate. You can buy it on Amazon, but again, you also do get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com, BUY peakperformance.com. We've also recently released organic mushroom coffee. We have these in Keurig compatible K-cup coffee pods. We have organic mushroom coffee with lion's mane, reishi, cordyceps, turkey tail, and chaga mushrooms blended with the high altitude organic coffee that we've been using and that we've been famous for years. So that's been a big hit, that one as well. You can get on our website or Amazon, any of our products. And of course, we're always famous for our organic green superfood powder that has almost 5,000 reviews on Amazon with a very high star rating. We're known as the best tasting USDA certified organic green superfood powder with over 25 plus organic ingredients. Again, we also have the organic red superfood powder. We still, of course, have the organic plant protein for those who do prefer the plant protein, but I'm really excited about this new beef protein isolate and all of our other products. We do have over 100 products, so just check us out if you type in Peak Performance Supplements on Amazon or if you go to buypeakperformance.com. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.